The U.S. struggles with its response to student protests. Thousands take to campuses across the country in support of Palestine and demanding divestment in Israel. But how badly has their movement been politicized? Are accusations of anti-Semitism legitimate? And is the authorities' response appropriate? I'm Andrea Sanke, and today's Newsmakers are U.S. student protests. In scenes reminiscent of anti-Vietnam War protests, students at top U.S. universities are taking a stand against Israel's war on Gaza and U.S. complicity in it. Their gatherings are mostly peaceful and technically within their rights under freedom of speech. But still, in New York, the city's Strategic Response Group, a specialized counterterrorism and political protest division, was summoned to take down Gaza solidarity encampments and arrest dozens. Many say it was an unjust overreaction, but leading Republicans in Congress say protesters are intimidating Jewish students and they'll face a harsher response if they don't leave now. Here's a look.
Pro-Palestinian protests have swept campuses across America. They began at Columbia University, where students set up a tent city on the campus, demanding the college divest from Israel and companies supporting its war effort. The university's administration called on police to quell the protests, and more than 100 students were arrested. These scenes have prompted other demonstrations, and they, as well as the crackdowns from the police, have intensified. At New York University, authorities took down tents and arrested more than 150 people, including students and faculty members. At the University of South California, officers with riot gear dispersed the students and made arrests. And state troopers, some on horses, entered the University of Texas, Austin. Yet the students are determined to keep protesting.
I don't think that our concerns about our personal safety are at the forefront of our minds right now. I think at the forefront of our minds is the violence that Palestinians are suffering at the hands of the Israeli state every day, these last 6 months and last, again, almost 80 years.
While the protesters see the authorities' response as suppression of free speech, some people have accused the protesters of anti-Semitism. Visiting Columbia University last week, House Speaker Mike Johnson said the US will do everything to protect the Jewish students. He also had a message to the demonstrators: go back to class and stop the nonsense.
I am here today joining my colleagues in calling on President Shafiq to resign if she cannot immediately bring order to this chaos. As Speaker of the House, I am committing today that the Congress will not be silent as Jewish students are expected to run for their lives and stay home from their classes hiding in fear.
The protests at Columbia University are reminiscent of the anti-Vietnam War revolt in 1968. Columbia students then occupied buildings on the campus and shut down the university. Clashes broke out when police moved in to clear protesters. More than 100 were injured and 700 were arrested. But in the end, the protesters did force the university to cut its ties with the institute doing research for the Vietnam War.
It is our responsibility to carry this forward the same way as it happened with the Vietnam protest, with the South African apartheid protest. It is our moment to show that this is wrong. This is not what we want the United States to do.
And in another historical echo with 1968, the Democratic National Convention will meet in Chicago in August to officially nominate Joe Biden as its presidential candidate. 58 years ago, protesters took the massive anti-Vietnam War demonstrations to the convention in Chicago. For 5 days, police and demonstrators clashed on the streets in one of the defining periods in modern US history. Many expect a large crowd to gather again in Chicago in August, but this time to call for an end to Biden's support for Israel's war on Gaza. Yet so far the US has largely ignored these calls, and many wonder if the recent momentum of the pro-Palestine movement can finally bring change.
So, will these protests continue in spite of a crackdown? And will they ultimately influence U.S. government and university policy on Israel? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Minneapolis, Taher Herzallah, a PhD student in American Studies at the University of Minnesota. From New York, Jared is a Jewish student at Columbia University. And from Prague, Adam Kissel is former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Higher Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Education under Donald Trump. Thanks all so much for being with me. Okay, let's start with the reaction by university authorities and police, particularly at Columbia, to call in the police, saying protesters don't have the, quote, right to disrupt campus life or harass and intimidate fellow students. Jared, you were there. Do you have any sympathy for, especially for University President Manu Shafiq, in supporting that call?
Bringing in police onto campus was a mistake. It showed the depths that they're willing to go in order to suppress student voices, in order to avoid listening to their students. And it ultimately backfired. In the moments where we all watched the police come on and arrest our friends and our classmates as they were sitting peacefully in a circle protesting Columbia's complicity in profiting off of Israel's genocide, a lot of us were galvanized, and the initial encampment was replaced by a new one on the other lawn right across from the main walkway. And when they tried to suppress 100 people, 1,000 people stepped up into their place. I think that it was dangerous, and I think it was ineffective. And I think that police have no place on campus if everybody is peaceful. And I can attest that everybody was peaceful as protest members.
As protest members, but they are arguing that Jewish students on campus have felt threatened, they felt unsafe, that anti-Semitism is real. What's your take on that as a Jewish student yourself?
I think that they're trying to distract from the genocide in Gaza, and they're hiding behind people like me. I'm a Jewish student on campus. I participate in the protests, and I feel perfectly safe doing so. I would not do something that made me unsafe. And Jewish students are also welcome to entirely ignore the protest. They can walk right by, and there are some Jewish students that come and counter-protest. We disagree with them, of course, but they're perfectly safe to do so. So they're focusing on campus safety for people like me, and I can assure you that we are just fine. If we want to talk about campus safety, we should talk about Gaza, where every single university has been destroyed in the last half of a year. So if that's what we want to talk about, we can definitely talk about how it's unsafe for anyone to attend university in Gaza, especially now that they're all destroyed. And that's who we're doing this for. Right. And when they try and shift it to our rhetoric or whether or not it makes people feel unsafe on campus, it's a distraction tactic.
But Jared, can you tell me where that's coming from? Are they making it up as a distraction? Or is there a sense of maybe paranoia or victimization? What is it? Because it's a real cause for a lot of Jewish students to say they have been intimidated, that they think anti-Semitism in the United States is truly a danger for them.
Let me be clear that anti-Semitism is a danger for all of us. And we need to do everything in our power to fight against anti-Semitism. Protesting for a free Palestine is not anti-Semitic. Jewish people have been part of this movement from the beginning. And I'm very proud of all of my Jewish friends who have put their bodies on the line for Palestine. I think that there's a conflation of safety and comfort. And I think for a lot of people who are taught that supporting Israel is a key component of their Jewish identity, the way that I was taught when I was little, protests against Israel can feel like it's protesting against them. I understand that because that was how I was raised. But to anyone who doesn't think that we respect all people, welcome all people, I encourage you to come, have conversations, meet people of all faiths, and understand why this issue is so important to us, and understand why we don't want to attend a university that profits off of a genocide. Okay,
let me ask, turn to Adam. You're in Prague currently, but you usually work out of Washington, D.C. You've worked with the White House for many years. Help us understand then how many you think truly share the thoughts then of, House Speaker Mike Johnson, for example, that really the only victims in all of this are the victims of Hamas, and that any protests on these universities really expressing this opinion. Sure, he says they're allowed if they're peaceful. He doesn't fully believe they are because he says those Jewish students are indeed being threatened. But how many really do believe that he is right in this sense and that these university protests are unjust and bad, really, for the country, as he puts it?
Well, he has an important point to make, which is that there are many people who are protesting who are not just pro-Palestine, but they really are pro-Hamas or anti-Israel or anti-Semitic. And when universities fail to uphold their own rules and they have uneven standards and students don't know what they can do and what they can't do without getting punished, it's more difficult for everyone. And students are taking advantage of that. Students take advantage of the fact that, for example, what we're seeing on the screen is bad optics for a school. They take advantage of the fact that a college doesn't have very good crisis training for its police or its administrators. And they say, well, we'll probably get away with it, so we're going to do it. So it's bad for the rule of law. It's bad morally to be taking the wrong side on this issue. But as a matter of free speech and freedom of association, great, you have that right. But so long as you obey the time, place, and manner restrictions that a university has set for everyone. Now, the issue that we've seen is that universities will sometimes go too far in maintaining order, and the students will sometimes go too far in exercising their rights. And it's very difficult if you're the administrator or if you're the policeman trying to figure out where one person's rights stop because another person's rights have started. That's especially the case for Jewish students who are seeing and hearing what's going on because they're seeing that they probably are being discriminated against from a civil rights point of view. They're seeing that there's a severe, pervasive, offensive set of activities directed directly at them in some cases, and they can't go to certain parts of campus because there are crowds of people who are keeping them out on purpose. So that's basically your explanation of what harassment is.
Adam, I mean, sorry, Jared, I could see you throw your hands up in exasperation there, but let me get to Taher and ask if you think it's true that there actually are, among these protesters, a lot of students who are just taking advantage of the situation and causing these problems that are a lose-lose, according to Adam, for everyone.
Absolutely not. I think that students are heroically and revolutionarily standing on the right side of justice here. Historically, students have pressed their academic institutions of higher learning to take a moral position, be it during the civil rights era or against the Vietnam War or against apartheid in South Africa or during the genocide in Darfur. Now students are yet again taking a bold and courageous stand against the genocide in Gaza and the university's complicity in the genocide in Gaza. The university is not a neutral actor in this situation. The billions of dollars of endowment they possess are invested in companies that profit from the suffering of Palestinians. And the students are saying enough is enough. They're talking about university investments in weapons manufacturers that arm the Israeli military in its genocidal assault on Gaza. So not only are these students bringing awareness about the suffering and the plight of the Palestinian people through the encampments and the protests, the peaceful protests and encampments, but they're also forcing the university to confront its complicity in this brutal occupation and this brutal violence that Israel has exacted on the Palestinian people for more than 200 days now. So, and frankly, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was because you talk about these billions of dollars in endowments that these universities get. And this is why they're actually taking the position they're taking against these protesters. Let's be honest, can these universities afford to lose those billions of dollars, Taher? I mean, is it worth them kind of digging their heels in and playing along with the politicization of this issue in order to keep that money?
Well, the students are not asking the university to just throw away billions of dollars. The students are asking the university to redirect its investments away from companies that profit from the suffering of Palestinians. There's no reason whatsoever. The universities themselves have SRI clauses, socially responsible investment clauses, in their investment portfolios that require them to invest in companies that do not violate human rights. And the universities are not abiding by their own policies for the most part. What we're saying is especially for the private universities, where their investments are not disclosed, where they're not very clear where the investments are being made. The students are demanding to disclose those investments so that we can divest the university funds from companies profiting from the occupation, and you can invest them in any other company you want. It's just not the companies that are making or contributing to the suffering of the Palestinian people. So it's not a very difficult sacrifice that the university is being asked to make. It's actually quite a moral position that the students are demanding the university takes.
Jared, I can see you agree there, but let me ask you first, because I did see you respond to what Adam Kissel was saying. When you hear politicians take a stance, saying they're taking the stance, especially on the right, in your defense as a Jewish student to protect your rights, what do you say to them?
One of the reasons I got so involved in this issue was because I didn't want anybody speaking for me. Mr. Kissel is speaking on behalf of Jewish students, but he is not a Jewish student at Columbia University. I am, and I see what's going on, and he shouldn't speak for me. He should only speak for himself. And when people protest against genocide, and the response is that makes Jewish people uncomfortable, that will lead to anti-Semitism, because that implies that Jewish people support genocide. I also will say, Mike Johnson, if he cared about Jewish people and Jewish safety, he would not push the anti-Semitic Great Replacement theory. So there are lots of bad actors getting involved, using my identity to try to suppress dissent and support our continued involvement in the displacement, occupation, oppression, and genocide of Palestinians. And I don't want my name, my identity being used to push so much violence. So it frustrates me when people speak on my behalf. And I've been on campus this entire year, and I can tell you that we are safe to do whatever we'd like. The only risks to Jewish students come when the Columbia University administration calls on the police to arrest Jewish students for protesting for Palestine.
Adam Kissel, then, part of that was directed at you because you were the panelist here, but it's a lot of this surrounds, House Speaker Mike Johnson actually going to New York to make his statements on these protests. Was that a smart move, or did it actually just stoke more division, backlash, and politicization of this issue?
Well, I think Jared has an important point, which is that insiders know their own campus better than outsiders do. And we've seen a lot more things happen on different campuses than Columbia. And we're talking about not only Columbia. So it's hard for a student at Columbia to really understand what's happening on other campuses. And it's hard for a politician to come in and understand what's happening hour by hour, day by day. But it's important for politicians to have their say, because this is a political issue. We're not going to resolve anything about the Middle East, I think, on this panel or at any particular university. But I think I should also address the previous comment, which is about not having institutional neutrality. University of Chicago has institutional neutrality, and I think that's helped them a lot over the last 4 or 5 decades. Harvard is considering institutional neutrality, and institutional neutrality means that a university doesn't take a side. It says that the university is not the critic, it's the home of critics, which includes the students on this panel, it includes faculty members, but administrators and senior leadership do not take a position. And that means that either side can have its full expression of free speech and associational rights to try to get its point across, but that's always within the rules. And I think that's what we see some politicians responding to. It's not just the merits of the issue, but also the breakdown in law and order. So it's saying something is peaceful, but you've taken over part of campus. That's just not peaceful, it's disorderly.
Jared, you seem to think that's a cop-out?
Yeah, protests are meant to be disruptive. If the entire history of protests that we have in this country subscribed to the rules, we would have far fewer rights, far fewer freedoms than we do today. And we understand that, and we modeled our protest after the 1968 encampments protesting the Vietnam War. And when you say campuses should not be neutral, or should be neutral and should not take a side, I would say that investing and profiting off of Israel's genocide of Palestinian civilians is taking a side. And we're fully on board with them not taking a side, and that requires divestment. And especially for Colombia, which is the largest landholder in Manhattan, I think their finances will be just fine if they invest in other things besides genocide. There's no financial reason for them to continue to profit off of killing Palestinian people.
Taher, let me come to you if I can, because now we've heard mention of, modeling these protests after the Vietnam War protests. And some are saying now that that's also, this has all been kind of a dress rehearsal for the Democratic National Convention, that these protesters will not be suppressed. And in fact, there is more to come because this movement, they want this movement, obviously, to continue until they see real results.
Absolutely. I mean, what's taking place and why Zionist groups and U.S. politicians are so concerned is that there is an ideological shift taking place in this country. And these students are at the forefront of this shift that's taking place. Israel's genocidal assault has only reinvigorated discussions on college campuses and in the American public about settler colonialism, about imperialism, and about Zionism in particular. And this movement is providing a narrative correction. For decades, we've been fed by U.S. media and politicians that Israel is this shining city on the hill in a dark and savage region. Well, now everyone is talking about Israel and seeing Israel for what it is, a brutal and murderous regime hell-bent on erasing the Palestinian people. And so the masks are fully off. This movement is spreading like wildfire. And more people from the American public are joining this movement and calling for an end to this genocide.
Taher, I have to ask you this, though. Is there a fear for you that if this does go on, for example, to the Democratic National Convention, if the movement gets bigger and bigger, gains more momentum, that it will backfire on you and your fellow protesters? Because if you take down the people in power right now, your alternative may be worse to come. It will end up gaining more support for Donald Trump, if indeed the U.S. presidential election is a Biden-Trump ticket. Does that worry you?
What's the alternative to genocide? We're already being killed en masse. Our universities have been destroyed.
Okay, but then you'll get an entire administration that won't even try to talk to Netanyahu. In fact, will go to any length to support Netanyahu and Israel, even if it means eliminating the Palestinian people. That would be basically, that's what Donald Trump wants. He's a huge Netanyahu fan. That's why he moved the embassy to Jerusalem in the first place.
Yeah, there's always this attempt by many to sort of frame this as a battle between good and evil, and that if we have to choose, the better evil, so to speak, by supporting the Biden administration and continuing to vote for him. And I think that's a very unfair dichotomy that's being presented on national TV and in other discourse as well. Our community and students and this movement is very clear. The vast majority of Americans are supportive of a ceasefire. The vast majority of Americans do not want this to continue. All the polls suggest this. And the polls suggest this even further when you look at the polling within the Democratic Party, particularly among progressives. So it's very clear where people stand on this issue. Now, it's the Biden administration's onus, not on us, to change course, to amend the situation, to fix the problem. It's not the onus is not on the people making the demands for an end to the ceasefire, to bear the responsibility of the future political outcome of a presidential election. What we're saying is now there's a genocide. Now we are being murdered. Now our universities and our hospitals and our doctors and our journalists are being eliminated. We want an end to this now. Whatever happens in November as a result of the Biden administration's actions, not as a result of our actions.
Okay.
It's the consequences of his defeat will be the consequences faced because of the genocide in Gaza, not because of anything that we do.
Adam, a final question for you then. From your political observations, will any of these student demands actually be met? Or is it at least sending a very powerful message that will influence leaders in both the government and these universities?
I think it's very unusual for a university to take student protests as a reason to do something different from what they already want to do. So there may be some universities that are looking for a reason to divest, and this maybe gives them the reason. But for the universities that don't want to, which is probably the majority, they're going to find every reason to continue doing what they're doing. And that's right, not just because of institutional neutrality, but because they've made the investments that they want to make. if they're involved in a mutual fund that happens to have a company that the protesters don't like, they're not going to pull out of that mutual fund. It just won't happen. In terms of sending a message, I think it's been embarrassing for the universities and really embarrassing for the students to be shown to be doing this. Now, for the ones who are doing civil disobedience, as Jared said, because they think it's the noble thing to do, okay, have civil disobedience, but then accept the consequences. And we're going to see lots of students get suspended and expelled, and that's going to be the legacy of these protests.
Okay.
People will forget about them over the years, and students will not be in school.
Jared, quick final thoughts?
Yes, thanks to student activism, Colombia has already divested from apartheid South Africa, from private prisons, from tobacco, and from fossil fuels. So clearly these protests do work, and we just hope that divesting away from Israeli occupation, Israeli apartheid can be the next step. So to dismiss student protests as ineffective is disingenuous, and we're not going anywhere until Colombia divests. So it can be over as soon as the president would like it to.
Okay.
And I'm very proud of all of the previous protesters who were responsible for getting Colombia to divest from all of those other things. And we believe it's possible, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it.
Jared, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sanke. We'll see you next time.